I think a lot of it just comes down to like, you might read a book like this, you might think, oh, I have to get to the real engineering. I got to get to the Silicon Valley style companies where I'll finally be happy. It's not necessarily the case. Hey there, welcome to Book Overflows, the podcast for software engineers by software engineers, where every week we read one of the best technical books in the world in an effort to improve our craft. I am Carter Morgan, and I'm joined here, as always, by my co-host, Nathan Toups. How are you doing, Nathan?
Doing great. Hey, everybody.
Well, as always, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. You can share the podcast with your friends or coworkers, share it on LinkedIn, share it in the work Slack. Anything to spread the podcast helps us grow. And if you'd like to spend more time with Nathan and I, you can always book a coaching session with us on Leland. We are there. And we are already coaching a couple people from the podcast. And so we'd love to talk to you about anything you might be needing help with in your career. And we are excited about the book this week. This is a book that's been on the list for a long time, and we're finally getting around to it. It is Staff Engineer by Will Larson. Let's talk a bit about Will Larson first. Will Larson is currently the Chief Technology Officer at Imprint, a modern co-branded credit cards company. He has over 15 years of experience scaling engineering teams at high-growth companies, with previous CTOs at Carta and Calm, and senior engineering positions at Stripe and Uber. Larson is a recognized thought leader in engineering management, having authored 4 books on engineering leadership, including An Elegant Puzzle and Staff Engineer, and maintains the widely read engineering blog Irrational Exuberance. An Elegant Puzzle, I've heard about this one a couple of times. Have you read that?
I haven't. I have it on my to-do list to add to our backlog. So
yes, that is his management book. Whereas this is more about being a staff engineer. And let's read the book introduction. It's, the full title is Staff Engineer, Leadership Beyond the Management Track. It's a pragmatic guide for software engineers seeking to advance their careers beyond the senior level without transitioning into management. Based on interviews with over a dozen staff engineers from companies like Dropbox, Etsy, Slack, and Stripe, the book addresses the critical gap in resources for navigating the technical leadership path. It covers essential topics including staff engineer archetypes, strategic thinking, technical quality management, and career advancement strategies for individual contributors who want significant organizational impact while remaining hands-on technologists. This essential resource provides both theoretical frameworks and practical advice for engineers and their managers navigating the unique challenges of staff plus engineering roles. Yeah, so I don't know. That's a really great description of the book. Sometimes I feel like we read these descriptions and have to actually explain what the book's about. Nope, that's what this book's about. And so we read it. I'll say that this episode is a little different from our usual ones in that this book is comprised out of 2 parts. There's the first half, which is like the meat. It's all the points he wants to make. And then the second half is a collection of stories from the engineers he talked to kind of assemble the book. Just the way the timing worked out with this episode, I was traveling last week, Nathan is traveling this week, so we're recording at a different time. I did not get to read all of the stories in the back, but I did read the meat of the book. And he kind of says the stories are roughly optional. So if at any point Nathan references a story that I haven't heard of, that's what's going on here. But we felt confident enough in getting the idea behind this book to be able to cover it in a single episode. All that being said, Nathan, give me your thoughts on Staff Engineer.
So I've been transitioning from going, I think maybe I'm going the opposite direction that you've been recently, which is I've been in a bunch of very early stage startups and then transitioned into some larger startups. I'm still in pretty small ones, right? In the grand scheme of things, sub 1,000 employees. The one I'm in currently is around 60 employees. It's still pretty small, but hierarchies start to show up. And I've been in a staff role for the last couple of jobs that I've been in. And what's funny is that there is no real playbook. It's really strange to get this title because the expectations do change in each organization. It's got that Conway's Law piece to it. It's like, we know that you're not on the management track. We know that you're an IC, though, that is, experienced enough to be a larger thinker in the organization, but your job starts getting a little fuzzier, right? You're writing less code, you're doing these other things. And I just kind of had to figure it out at each organization. And I think this book would have been really helpful like 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, to understand, like, do I fit within these archetypes? How do I make sure that I'm maximizing my value versus doing something that feels comfortable? And I like the language that this book uses, and I'm pretty excited to get to jump into it. It's a pretty narrow topic, right? So I will say that one thing that we're really diving into here is that this really is about staff plus engineering. This is not like Gerger's book that kind of goes in all encompassing, talking about all the different paths you're going on. This book is really sort of those decision point books where you're like thinking about, do I want to be a manager or do I want to stay on the IC track? And what does it actually mean to stay on the IC track? And I think that this book, it's beautifully structured for that. And if you're not interested in that question, then we can have a larger discussion. But I think for me personally, selfishly, this is like scratched an itch, and I think he understands why. He has a lot of credibility on this topic.
Yeah, this might be the perfect episode to listen to if you're kind of early in your career or a manager or not really, or not even aware that this is something that exists. Something I really enjoy about our field in software engineering is that we do have those two separate tracks. You can go into management or you can kind of keep rising up as an individual contributor. And I find that there's a decent amount of people in our field who don't even know that, who think that at some point, and honestly, at a lot of companies, if they're not as like techie, there might not be two separate tracks. You might cap out at senior engineer, and then after that, to move up, you've got to go into management. I'm not sure if this book would be applicable to lots of our audience, just because the very nature of the staff engineering role is that at most companies, senior is the terminal level. Once you reach senior, there's no expectation for you to move up. You can stay senior for the next 30 years of your career and just be fine. And a lot of people actively make that choice. You know, when I was at AWS, there's a little different. L5 is like the mid-level position and L6 is the senior position. But L5 is the terminal role. You're not expected to move up after L5. And I met lots of brilliant engineers who just stayed at L5. They didn't want the increased responsibilities of going L6, and they did a great job as L5s. The book is definitely targeted towards like Silicon Valley type tech companies. We're going to talk about that a lot through it. I'm I'm a little burnt out on Silicon Valley tech companies at this point in my career. I've kind of worked for them a lot. I found them, and granted, I was at some during the pandemic. My most recent one, I found to be very mismanaged. And I actually read Tanya Riley's The Staff Engineer's Path, which is kind of like a complement to this book, prior to doing my last role, which had a staff engineer title, and it actually wound up being like not a great fit because I found out that they were using staff the way other people use senior. It was weird. And so yeah, this is very Silicon Valley tech heavy. I'm just encountering this book at a weird time because I have recently left big tech and joined a 30-person startup, and have found it very refreshing that I don't have to worry about any of the crap in this book. And so it's just, I've just encountered this at a funny time.
Yeah, no, this is interesting too, because I try to read through. So I do think that I agree with that critique, and I think this will be really, really nice to dive into. There's not a distinction in this book between the inevitable bureaucracy that is big tech and the freedom that the role gives you. So I will tell you what's appealing to me is there's this, and we should probably read this at some point. It's called The Barbarian and the Bureaucrat, talking about how there's two types of personalities when you bootstrapping a startup, and you need barbarians to be the early stage folks. They're the ones who can just get stuff done. And then you mature into bureaucrats, because when your business is mature, you understand who your audience is, you know how to grow. The barbarians really don't fit in anymore, right? Like they're not the right people to create a stable platform that is going to grow into, multi-billion-dollar company. You need those bureaucrats. Except there is a role for a barbarian if the organization structures itself properly. And I do think that if you look at the archetypes that are in this, if you kind of read between the lines, this is not what Will Larson's saying. This is what I'm saying. Some of the archetypes are a way to have barbarians live amongst the bureaucrats.
Interesting.
And I think that if you are that type, and this gets, and we'll get into those where I think, for instance, like the solver, or the there's certain types of like little archetypes in here where a solver, which is somebody I kind of fall into, somebody who kind of floats and hops around and like looks at juicy problems and maybe doesn't quite fit into any like product team, but maybe looks at this like kind of bigger picture stuff. Well, barbarians are good at breaking down barriers that are artificial and doing all these other things. And so I do think that if you kind of read between the lines, there is something there. I think also for early stage startups, and again, not what's said in the book here, I wish it did, is let's say you're confident that your startup's going to double or triple revenue, it's going to double or triple the headcount. If you want to position yourself that when the time is right to be on the IC track, that you know that you don't want to transition into management, you don't want to become director of engineering, but instead you'd like to become principal engineer or something like this, right? Setting yourself up for success so that your little packet, or when you're having a big conversation with the CTO and you say, hey, look, I know how I can serve this organization better as we grow. I'm not going to be a good manager. I want us to create an IC track and I would like to be the beginning of this. This is another good book to give you that template if you think you're going to make that transition. And so that's where I like, if you look at these as like, how could this be useful? Even if you're not technically in some, 3 levels of management, highly bureaucratic organization that has a very mature business model. And so anyway, that's sort of like my optimistic view of like how I think this book could actually be a little more useful.
Yeah, I'll say what this book does a great job of is giving that vision for, okay, what does individual contributor leadership look like? I guess I would disagree with the idea that like staff engineers are a way to still be a barbarian in a bureaucracy, because in my observation, at least, like at the Silicon Valley tech companies, like it's all bureaucracy. Like that is what marks a successful engineer, is who can most successfully navigate the bureaucracy. And I don't even mean that necessarily in a bad way. Like I think one of the mistakes I've made in my career is like working for AWS. And AWS is a very impressive feat of engineering. And the component I worked on, Private Link, I mean, this thing generated like $1 billion a year in revenue. It was deployed across 35 different data centers and 350 hosts. Like it supported critical operations. Like I remember when HBO Max changed their name to Max, that was my problem for some reason, because HBO Max is a huge customer of ours. Like the New York Times, Apple, like lots of stuff was built on the foundation of Private Link, right? And because of that, there's lots and lots of like telemetry and automated deployments and rollbacks and setups. It's very, very impressive to manage this whole thing. And also because of that, you move very, very slowly when building Private Link. It's such a critical infrastructure for so many external businesses, and also just for AWS in general. A lot of AWS is built on top of Private Link. And I made the mistake of thinking like, this is true engineering. This is how engineering should be done. And it's not true at all. That's an excellent example of critical engineering done at massive scale. But it will kill you if you're trying to operate like that, for example, at a startup. And so in a situation like that, being an effective technical leader does include managing the bureaucracy and working within it, because it's very critical to have a bureaucracy to keep this component that's the backbone of a lot of systems in the modern internet working. But it will kill you if you try to implement that stuff at like a startup. I guess with like staff engineer roles, I see a lot of that. Like how do you manage the bureaucracy? How do you keep your leadership happy? How are you coordinating across teams? How, this is the point the book makes a lot, which is that your effort is going to be measured across years. And that can be tricky, because when you're a junior, your effort is measured pretty immediately. I am given ticket, I complete ticket is successful, done. Staff engineer, I mean, you might be setting a technical vision that you might not see whether or not it was correct for 2 years. And that can be tough, because you can feel like, like you have to have good instincts. You got to feel very confident in your vision, because otherwise you flail around for 2 years and you don't know what worked.
this is good. And I think this is good for us to have a little bit of a debate before we get into the meat of the book,
Right.
because I still think that there's a middle way, in that there are startups that there's the scrappy early stage one where you literally,
Right.
you are the two pizza team. And I think that this hierarchical structure probably is overkill in the way that they prescribe some of these. But I've played the role of like founding engineer in organizations where you are expected to have an opinion, let's say, on one of my favorite, and I'm going to pick on them because I love Stripe. Stripe is a really cool company. They obsessed over their API early in the organization. Their staff leadership, as they even have in the interviews, were personally obsessed with the API infrastructure early on in the startup. That was a multi-year investment that paid off huge, because they just blew their competition out of the water because developers loved the Stripe API.
Right.
Stripe API is beautifully architected. Maybe some people internally in Stripe are like, "Oh yeah, you don't know where the skeletons are," but to the outside observer, documentation's amazing, the reliability is like impeccable, and it was an obsession they invested in early on. And I think that there's a big gap of like, there's a lot of startups that get past the two pizza team and are not at Amazon level. And what I mean is that you get to the 100, 500,
Right.
1000 engineer level. These orthogonal decisions, how do we build this? Those things will just destroy what we call developer productivity or developer experience. And I do think that staff thinking engineering really pays dividends. It's these folks that can kind of come in and again, maybe we can talk about some of the key points here. These archetypes, early on, you're probably just a tech lead, right? Early on, and tech leads even also this is one of the archetypes, period. You're not a manager, but you kind of have responsibility for the outcome of some of the engineering efforts inside of a team. And you're like this sort of technical lead, right? That's where this term comes from. You're an architect, right? So again, founding engineers and early stage engineers, CTO will fit this role as well, is that you're architecting you're responsible for the direction and the quality, right, of the product that's going forward. Again, at early stage, that's probably the CTO or some of the early, senior level engineers. Y'all are just kind of being scrappy, making decisions, changing stuff on a regular basis. But you still have this sort of like higher order thinking. You're still having to do stuff that's not structured and not just out of a ticket, right? You're still having to come up with systems thinking that comes into this. And I think as the organization grows and it matures, some folks thrive in this and some folks really don't, right? Some folks are really smart, but you really kind of have to give them the 5 things that they have to focus on. And other folks, you give them this more abstract business problem, and they really thrive in that ambiguity. They're the ones who are like scrappy and working across teams and doing this stuff. And I think if you're not VP or CTO level, right, and your organization's grown large enough that, let's say there's a platform engineering team or somebody who's doing internal tools, we see this a lot, right? Actually, in the stories at the end, there's the infrastructure and internal tools teams, and then there's like the product teams. And it gets tricky because when we talk about staff engineer, I think it's a lot easier to be successful as a staff engineer if you go towards the platform and infrastructure side.
Right.
Because you're thinking in these like abstract ways, where a product team, having a lot more terminal folks and like a product manager is probably a perfectly fine way of structuring. You don't necessarily need someone who's pontificating on whatever. So yeah. Anyway, last little note before we really get into the book. I remember being so confused that staff was a higher title than senior. Yeah. Like when I first heard about it, somebody was like, "Oh, we're going to offer you staff," and I was like, "I don't know. Is that below senior?" Like I remember the first time I'd ever heard about it, and they're like, or had somebody who was like, "Oh, he just got staff," and I was like, what does that mean? Like that seemed like a downgrade to me the first time I heard it. So if you were in that boat, it's okay. It is confusing to the uninitiated people. A lot of people would think that a senior is a higher title than staff.
Staff sounds like what we should call mid-level.
Yeah.
Right. And mid-level isn't even a thing. It's just software engineer is the title.
And then depending on the organization, it's principal. Principal's like,
yes.
And then if you get into this is super rare category, but it's called distinguished.
Right.
And a distinguished engineer is like up there with VP level at most organizations, where you're not managing anyone. You're probably like invented a compiler or created a programming language, or you're just like, you're such a deep expert in some area that you being this distinguished engineer is this. And I think we've talked about this a little bit in the Unicorn Project, right? They kind of outline this.
It's funny, at my new company, they're just, and you find this at every company, but at this one, they're just some engineers who aren't as aware of like what the market for like Silicon Valley looks like, and they weren't aware of kind of like levels.fyi for looking at compensation. And we were talking, someone was like, basically saying like, are there any engineers that make $1 million a year? And so like, oh yeah. And they're like, no, there's no way. I'm like, yeah, let's look it up. Like, and I pulled up Amazon levels.fyi, and I was like,
Yeah,
yeah,
with the
here we
total
go.
comp. Yeah.
You have distinguished engineer, 1.4 million. Like that's
Yeah. So
I think even principal got close to, I think that was like 900,000 or something.
Yeah,
like
it's
that.
crazy. I didn't realize. I was like, I didn't quite understand this. So I actually was in Georgia Tech, and people would talk about levels.fyi and all these other things, and I didn't really understand how insane the total comp was out in Silicon Valley. In the midst of that, I had a friend who was working at Twitter at the time, pre-Elon Musk days. But I will tell you, I think I've mentioned this before. Twitter was a hot mess before Elon Musk. People don't talk about this, like they glamorize the before days. But he had, I think, like 6 different managers within a year, constantly trying to figure out, because, they still don't make a profit, and they never did. Right. And, but his total comp was nuts, right?
Yeah.
He was making good 6 figures just by itself because it's Silicon Valley. He was an SRE. I don't remember what level. I think he was senior. I don't think he was staff. But his RSUs basically doubled his income, right?
Right.
And so his stocks that he just got is comp. It's not options like what an early stage startup gets. And he just was like, it was when he told me, I was like, that is the craziest amount of money I can't imagine. And he wasn't even at these like upper echelon compensation levels. And yeah, it's nuts. Now I will say very few people are in the 99th percentile of what Silicon Valley is looking for in talent, right? And that's why their compensation is so high. These people are super rare, and they are hard to replace. And we even saw this, right? Like, look at Mark Zuckerberg, infamously has been doing tens of millions. I think there's a rumor that was one as a contract that was like up to $100 million in total comp over some contract length to hire AI talent. That's nuts. Like absolutely nuts. And that blew out all of the levels.fyi stuff too. If you're a PhD in AI, this is a good time to be alive. Put it that way.
This is your COVID market. Have at it.
It's nuts.
Well, so I mean, we've alluded to some of the points in the book, but maybe we can talk a bit about like, so what does staff engineers actually do? Because that's kind of the key construct here, which is, so staff engineer, it's after senior, which is the terminal level at most positions. Staff engineer is not a direct leadership role. You don't typically manage other engineers. And I'll say that is a bigger difference outside, like in Silicon Valley versus non-Silicon Valley companies. Is non-Silicon Valley companies, I see this more often, like where it's either like there's no such thing as a staff engineer, and to move up, you have to go into management, or you have like quasi, like hybrid engineers / managers. Like you're a tech lead and you actually have people management responsibilities, like you're in charge of promotion cycles and things like that. And you have to figure all of that stuff out. Then you get to kind of like the Silicon Valley companies, and you have what is the staff engineer role, where you don't have direct people management responsibilities, and your job is kind of coordinating larger engineering projects. And from what I've seen, especially at kind of like the FANG level companies, what really sets a staff engineer apart is cross-team impact. that was at my last place. They used the title staff engineer, but then they had like multiple staff engineers assigned to each team. So it was just a weird dynamic. And it wasn't like a staff engineering position because, again, from what I've seen, that's really what makes a staff engineer is cross team impact. So Will Larson outlines kind of some key categories of what makes a staff engineer. He says they set technical direction. They are responsible for mentorship and sponsorship, so growing engineers. They provide engineering perspective. They're in charge of exploration, like taking on ambiguous problems. And they do a lot of glue work, which is doing needed but invisible work to keep teams moving forward. Tanya Riley is the, if not the inventor of this term, then certainly the one who popularized it. As far as how much code you write, it's a spectrum. Some staff engineers write some code, some write none code, but according to Will Larson, all write less code than they did prior to becoming a staff engineer, which I think is interesting in the AI era, because I find that frequently tough to explain like friends or relatives when they say like, are you worried about AI taking your job? And I always say like, well, writing the code has never been the hard part.
Right.
And that frequently shocks people because like, what do you mean? Because to the layperson, of course, that's the hard part. Code is weird. Code is scary. But yeah, as you move further and further up the ladder, you're doing a lot less writing code. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, Nathan, what do you think about all this or anything to come?
In my current company, my title is actually software architect, which is a bit of an old school term.
Right.
From a levels standpoint, it's above senior engineer. Mm-hmm. And these are my responsibilities. Like what you just outlined was what I do. And it was a little weird because before I was a staff engineer on a platform engineering team. And that was actually pretty clear that I'm sitting across a lot of teams, right? We're thinking about the platform. We're thinking about developer experience and doing these other things. In this role, though, I'm at a blockchain company and I'm actually trying to navigate usefulness. I'm technically under the growth part of the organization. And my role is to kind of guide and technically we're actually under what we're calling the research and innovation lab. So it's really fun because I get to play all the time. I get to work with, I have technically, I guess, a tech lead over a couple of engineers, and we're rapidly prototyping and building weird stuff and talking to other teams and figuring out how we can be useful with those teams. And so sometimes even within the organization, it's a little weird to talk to folks because they're like, what are you working on? Because they're maybe working on a particular product. And we're like, oh, we're showing how we can do this really weird thing with this technology and coming over here because these guys have been pushing this off for a long time because this is like a hard problem to solve. And so I'll write technical specifications or have proof of concept or show how if we do this bit of work and that bit of work and we put these things together, and then I'm also sort of in this sort of like mentoring and sponsorship standpoint. If I see a project going on somewhere else in the organization, I can put my stamp on it and say, I think this is I think there's a there. I think that there's something really cool here. And if they figure this out, this will actually help this other team, right? Like I'm kind of looking at how do we navigate prioritization, working stuff. And I'm not always successful. Some of these are high risk. We actually have it in our vision document for our team that we should take on high risk projects. We should take on projects that other teams are worried that if they fail, they'll waste all this time. We try to figure out the cheapest way possible to work on a high risk project and then try to qualify whether it's actually worth investing time in. We're big enough that we can do this, right? Like there's enough engineers in our company that we can kind of take on. There's enough tech debt. There's enough weird things that are, as an organization, we're interested in. I love this. I love this because I'm not on the leadership track. I'm not on a product team because I think, if we go back to Google's book, they really don't talk about staff engineers at all in that book. They talk about software engineers becoming product leaders, right?
Right.
And Google's very product oriented. And I think that was the path was I go into engineering management or I go into product, right? If you are a higher order thinking software engineer and you really want to get into it, and this is how the current CEO at Google got into that, right? He moved into product, but he's a software engineer and he really understood the product hierarchy at Google and then became CEO. Staff is this sort of like weird newer title. I think in the same way that Google made up the SRE title, we've now made up platform engineering. You could obviously look at this and go, is this just a navel-gazing way for Silicon Valley to give a track to retain talent so that these people don't go off and become CTOs at other early stage startups, right? I think that that's possible. Is like, can I give these out-of-the-box thinkers who are highly creative a way of doing something within our organization and solve problems in a way that we're struggling with? I mean, to me, and maybe this is a cope because I'm trying to justify why I'm in the organization and why I'm a barbarian popping around at this startup. But I don't know. I'm loving it, I guess.
No,
right now.
I think it's good. And I think one of the great things about reading a book like this, even if you're not at a place where staff engineer is really a thing, is this does give you an idea of like, okay, what does higher level engineering leadership look like? Because I think, especially if you're at like an early stage startup, or you can work at places, and it's not just startups, right? Where like the tactical tornado, which is what John Osterhout talks about, someone who kind of just codes and codes and codes and codes and just creates lots and lots of different features and doesn't really take any consideration into how this is fit into a larger maintainable architecture, where that is really, really valorized. Or not even that it's valorized like in the sense that like leadership is explicitly claiming, yes, this is a good thing, we don't care about architecture, but more that your leadership can maybe be busy dealing with other stuff, just kind of the day-to-day people management, growing revenue, that they don't even think about this. And so if you join as an engineer and you're thinking, okay, I don't really want to be a manager, but I do want to be a good engineer. So what does that look like? I think the naive approach is just like tactical tornado. Just, I'm going to crank out so many tickets. I'm going to write so much code. It's going to be great. And then your leadership will say, whoa, this guy, he's cranking a lot of tickets, writing a lot of code. That's good. So then if you want to start thinking, well, I'd like to be a force multiplier. I'd like to grow the company. I'd like to set us up for success. What does that look like as an engineer and not a manager? That's where all the concepts in this book really do apply very well. Setting technical direction, mentorship and sponsorship, exploration, being glue. That is stuff that needs to happen at any company. And the amount of time you spend on each part will differ depending on the size of your company. But I have felt that joining my my current company, a startup, I am doing a lot of this stuff. And like last week, I spent a lot of time on our telemetry because we were not in a great place with telemetry. We had some very basic metrics, but we didn't have more custom business metrics. And so that was something that didn't have to immediately get done, but I kind of took scope of the feature work for the week and said, okay, I think we're in a good place with this. I don't think we need to be, we need full capacity on this. So I'm going to hop off for a bit, really dive into telemetry and get all that figured out. And yeah, like I think that's the kind of thinking. I don't think I would have thought about that if I hadn't been reading books like this or understanding this space a lot more. I think I would have said, oh, hey, look at this big backlog of tickets of quick features to follow up on. I'll just get a lot of those done. But yeah, it's I am glad to be at a place right now where, like, again, I'm very burnt out on the Silicon Valley thing.
Totally. No, and I completely agree. And again, I think this is a book where if you read this just at its surface level, it's very prescriptive on, I want to work my way up through the ranks at one of these major Silicon Valley companies. And you could easily look at this and go, you know what? It doesn't really apply to me. I'm not interested. But if you look at it as a framework for a type of problem solving where you have to navigate ambiguity, there are some really useful pieces. And I'll say this because I was at this, you bring up that nasty little startup that you're in. The best team I've ever been on, again, we'll go back to this one, is this fintech company. And there was only 8 of us. We even had a principal software engineer, partially that title to acquire that talent, right? He was like a VP of engineering at another company. We needed him to really help, and he loved writing code. He came in, and this is the first time I'd ever seen a software engineer who obsessed over understanding the business to a degree. He did not just say, oh, tell me what I need to do and I'll work on it and I'm super smart. He goes, I need to really understand how our business operation functions because I think our approach might be wrong, right? It was one of these like sort of out of the box. And then he realized one of the reasons we were struggling was because the way that we structured the code wasn't easy to be tested, right? He identified the fact that he was a big fan of inversion of control, dependency injection type tooling. He was also like a Java background, and we had a big Python code base. And so he's like, I'm going to introduce some ideas from Java world into this Python code base. I'm sure some of the Python programmers were like losing their mind, but the code was not maintainable. It was just a complete mess. It's sort of like founder code, right? And he needed to make it into something that was, evolvable over time. And he is one of those sort of like 10x programmers. And this is before we had all the augmented AI tools. And I remember within like a week and a half or less than 2 weeks, less than a sprint cycle, he had implemented this dependency injection framework and had gotten test coverage like over 90% on these like critical code paths. And then with confidence, he actually knew also he found bugs, but left them in the current implementation so that he could kind of with the refactoring legacy code pattern that we talked about, right? He made it behave the way that it was expected to, but also annotated where the issues had actually come from and that they needed to be fixed. And he separated these things out. And it was a maturity that he brought to problem solving that after that categorical problem was solved, we knew that we could rely on the CI/CD pipeline around that code base moving forward, right? It was one of those things where like lots of apprehension, lots of fear. Every time we want to do a code deploy, we're like, oh, is this going to break everything?
Right.
And he brought this maturity that we were like, oh, this is how we should be engineering, right? Like solve these problems categorically, make it so that you don't think about it anymore and then move on. And it just had a huge impact on me. Like I come back and think of like, how would this guy solve this problem? Like what am I doing that I'm running in circles because I've just assumed the premise was given to me is correct. Should I question the premise, right? Should I do this thing? And that was this higher order engineering that I think of this guy. His name is Brian. And we actually had 3 Brians on the team, so I'm not revealing who this was. All 3 Brians were awesome, but 3 Brians on a team of 8 people was really special. But yeah, so anyway, like I saw this and I was like, this is cool. Like he was a leader without being a leader. He solved these kind of cool problems, and of course he would move on and solve all the juicy stuff. Like he loved working at and then empower other engineers and would sponsor things. We got in a crazy whiteboarding session one time and I convinced him of an idea by the end of it, which was like nuts because I was senior level at the time, right? So he was like, no, Nathan's right on this. And I was like, okay, this is cool. Like he's got no ego, like it was like a really neat, it was like a neat experience where, yes, we had titles, but we were beyond titles. That was like sort of the engineering.
Right.
And I think they talk about this too in this book, right? Is that staff in a bigger organization can kind of be this nice, I think in one of the stories later in the book, they actually say this person was the director of, I think, platform or something. And then they moved laterally from director of platform engineering into a staff position. And when they were director, people would be pretty standoffish because they saw them as sort of like the management track. Like, oh, management's coming in, they're telling us how to do stuff. But when he was staff, it was like, oh, well, this person doesn't have an agenda. Like they just really care about the engineering excellence in the organization. And it was easier for them to negotiate maybe a change in the organization. And again, that's a big Silicon Valley technical bureaucracy thing. But I think that's also pragmatically why this title exists in those large organizations is like, how do you have soft power? How do you wield this like soft power and influence people?
Well, and it is a lot about soft power. Will Larson talks about that idea that really, as a staff engineer, yes, you have some authority, but most of your authority, almost all of it, is derived from the managers. And to be an effective leader, you actually have to be a more effective follower. And that's, you have to kind of be constantly aligned with your management. And I think it's really, I don't know. in my career, I've been fortunate. Like I have a good resume, I interview well. And so when I do join companies, I have the ability to be very selective about what I join. Even in, when I was looking for a new job a couple months ago, this is a pretty frosty market. I still had several offers on the table without exerting myself too much. And I know that not everyone's like that. I know a lot of people just kind of have to take the first job that comes their way. I guess what I'd say is I would hope that anyone who's at the staff engineer level would have the ability to kind of negotiate, or, would be an attractive enough candidate that they are receiving offers from multiple companies, because so much of setting yourself up for success is being selective in who you work for. Because especially as an individual contributor, you need to be really aligned with your manager. And if you don't trust them, or you think they don't have good judgment, or you don't like working with them, that's going to be really, really tough. Yeah, I just, but then it's also hard too. Like one of the things I don't like at Silicon Valley tech companies is like, it can be nice when you do the interview loop because, and I don't know how this would be at other, like maybe if like real deal staff engineer level, but I know at a lot of Silicon Valley tech companies where you're doing like a mid-level or a senior loop, you're actually not usually interviewing for that particular role. You're interviewing for the generic mid-level senior position. And then once you get that, you are like assigned to a team. Like Google is infamous for their team matching process, which is awful. Like you can get the offer and then still take 6 months to be assigned to a team. I like this from like an interviewing perspective, because it can be nice to not feel like I'm competing directly against other candidates. Like I'm competing against the bar, and so long as I pass the bar, I'm in. I hate this from like a where you work perspective. Like it's really tough because you can just get like assigned to a random team with like people you don't really know, management you don't really trust. I mean, a huge reason why I joined my current startup is because I was kind of only looking at startups this go around. This was the one that gave me the most face time with the CEO and the CTO throughout the engineering or the interview process.
That's great.
And over that time, I just came to trust their judgment. And I just thought, you know what, especially when you're join a startup, like you got to be ride or die with these guys. And I felt that too. And that like, there's an amount of like fight picking you can do in private to hopefully change their opinions or determine direction. There is like zero fight picking you can do in public, because especially as an individual contributor, you need to be aligned completely with what they do. That's where you derive all of your authority. And so if at a certain point you don't trust the decisions they're making, like it's just game over.
Right. Yeah. I've been in a slew of early stage startups and then kind of moved into some of these more, Series B, Series C level startups are a little more mature. And so I really appreciate what you're looking for with, working at Leland and doing this work. I like that if the company's small enough, I can slack the CEO,
Right,
if need
right.
be, and probably have enough visibility to do these things. I think that that's a lot of fun. I like working with people collaboratively like that. The book really does give us an indication, though, that, and I've been in this trap before. I said, if I only had more authority,
Right.
then I could do these things. And the book does a great job of squashing this idea, right? The book actually does a really great job of showing you that actually the title isn't going to give you the authority. The track that you're on is not going to give you the authority. You actually have to earn this authority from the bottom up. And I would say that the best CTOs and CEOs, yes, they have the title, but they also legitimately have earned it, right? They have the respect. The good companies, right, have the respect from the staff and do these things. Emulating this in a place where you don't have authority actually has a lot of benefits, right? Like a staff engineer doesn't hire and fire folks typically.
Right.
You get to so therefore you're not in this sidestep of, oh, if I interact with this person, are they going to fire me? Right? Like you get to sidestep a lot of these interesting pieces. And they even, there was actually a title that I had never heard of. Where was it? Technical advisor to the head of infrastructure. So,
oh yeah.
And there's these kind of interesting things where I had never heard of this role. And it was almost like hand to the king, right? The it was this role, and I was like, that sounds like it would be a lot of fun. If I was going to be in a big organization,
Right.
being the technical advisor to the CTO or the technical advisor to some VP of whatever, that would be a lot of like that is in alignment with like what I love, which is like working with a lot of people, looking at juicy problems, being an extension of the vision of that office, right? And that's the idea here is that like, okay, CTO has vision about what the technical direction of the organization is, but there's not enough time in the day for the CTO to talk to the 1,000 engineers. So is there a person that can help with the technical vision and be sort of the surrogate and then coordinate back with the CTO on some regular basis? I thought this was interesting from like I know that you're a bit jaded by the larger organizations, but amongst a larger organization, that's kind of a cool role. And I think it's like a good example of how a staff plus path could get to like a certain type of unique individual who fits into that. So anyway, I very few people will ever get a role like that or even maybe find it appealing. But I thought it was cool to see somebody who was on that trajectory and like loved being in that role.
And if you get that, you too could make $1.4 million according to levels.fyi.
Right. Right. And I will say, you know, this gets us back to like our interview with Jason Fried recently, which is like, don't chase the money. Right. And I think this book actually, if you read between the lines too, if you think, oh man, if I became staff engineer, then that's like senior plus plus, right? And it's not. I think this book tries to do a good job of saying this is a different job. This is a different job than being a senior engineer, and it's not for everyone. I think in my thoughts on this is that I do think, and I'll get into more of this in the hot takes later. This book doesn't address like the Peter principle problem,
Right.
which is that like I think that, and I think actually in the comments a while back, somebody in the comments was talking about what they would talk about like title inflation, and were we worried that maybe more people are just getting the staff title because it's a hiring tactic, they want to get talent from some bigger tech company or whatever. I do think that this is a real risk. Right.
Oh yeah, I mean the place I used was using the term like everyone at my last place was one title higher than they should have been.
Right.
Right.
And that does two things, right? Number one, I think actually I was doing a little bit of like research on some of the people in the stories, and I was like, where are they now? Because a lot of these are from like 5 years ago. And some of them, like one of them moved from this startup where they were staff level and they moved to another company. I can't remember, it was Uber or Stripe or something, and they're senior level now. Right. So like they were interviewed as a staff engineer talking about all the staff engineer stuff, but whatever new company that they're in, they got their, hierarchy and band changed. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a promotion or a demotion, by the way. I just want to like put that out there.
Oh,
if you have a staff level and you're like at a Series C startup and you go to Google, you're not going to be staff. I can almost 100% promise you, unless you did something so exceptional that you were actually operating at like a VP level, and they were like, "Oh, this person, invented, Memcached or something, and we want to hire them in as staff because they're, doing cool open source stuff, right, or something." Most likely, you're going to go to that bigger company that has probably higher standards for what this means and how you navigate stuff, and you're probably going to be one bump down or whatever.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, it's interesting the way you think about your career, because on the one hand, I think we have to be pretty clear-eyed about our careers and say like these are jobs, and it's not necessarily like that you're going to find a ton of like joy and excitement out of your job. But there's also the truth that like you shouldn't hate your job, and you should be able to find some sort of momentum or energy from it. Maybe not all the time, right? Like for example, I'm going into work in a couple hours, and I'm not dreading it, right? And I'm excited about some of the problems I have to tackle. Would I rather be at home? Of course, 100%. But I'm excited about somewhat the day offers ahead. I just remember in college, like I didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to study, and I remember thinking like finance. Like I think I'm gonna go into finance, and so I was doing my finance class, and I hated it. And I thought to myself, I remember doing my homework and thinking, but I can't hate this. This is what I want to do with my life. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't do something you hate as your job or your career. And I think, like Jason Fried said, like this book, you kind of read between the lines. You can't chase the money. The money's nice, but at the end of the day, you need to be doing something where you get a decent amount of fulfillment out of it. And the people interviewed in this book in staff level roles seem to really enjoy what they're doing. But not everyone would. I mean, when we were looking for a job a couple months ago, my wife and I were talking about it. Like, do we want to move to Silicon Valley? Do we want to go do that thing? Do we want to try to work our way up through the ranks at Apple and become like a senior engineer or a staff level engineer? And just in my heart of hearts, I was like, no, that's not what I want out of my
same.
life. Like, and maybe I'll change. Maybe in a couple years, I'll, have played and become more competent technically and feel like, I really would like to work at a place where you're just purely thinking about the technical stuff. But right now, it's not what I want. Right now, I really like being at a place where I get to think a lot about the business and the product and see how the sausage is made from all the different angles. That's what's giving me motivation and energy right now. But you just need to be aware of what you're getting into when you get into a staff engineer role, because it's not just I'm a senior engineer, but I get paid more. It's like they say, like you're writing a lot less code. It's a lot of like internal politicking. It's a lot of coordinating efforts across teams. It's a lot of keeping your manager, your sponsors happy. That is death for some people. Some people really thrive on it, but different people are different. You just got to know who you are.
Right. And I will say, like, my career, I've wandered a lot more, right? I am not.
I'm in my wandering phase.
Yeah. So like I've not been driven like that. That just never has been my personality. To me, it was, if there's one through line, it's my modus operandi has been, am I working on what I think are interesting problems? And I know that is very like woo-woo sounding,
sure.
But so there's this feedback loop, which is, can I be deeply interested in the thing I'm working on? And can I maximize the value in compensation by output of those things? And so when I realized, like, yes, sure, I could work on like, chip tunes or something, like some weird Nintendo thing. Is there a way for me to be valuable and sustain, my family and stuff with that? No, right? Like at least not one that I've figured out. So while I would put that under like interesting, weird hobby, it would not be something that I'm going to invest time and energy into. Turns out that I just really like the intersection of like humans with thinking about how bits flow over the wire, right? If you really kind of reduce down what I do, as I like thinking about the software engineering side, but I also really care about the infrastructure. And we talk about the glue part here. So one of the things that I've noticed in my organization is a lot of people breeze over and have a high pain threshold for getting test environments set up. And so one of the things I took onto my shoulders was, well, our brand new junior engineer should be able to spin up an environment out on a whim, right? That was my like sort of little product piece. And we made a really like scrappy version of it, but I've continuously invested in making this easier and trying to share this with other organizations. And we even have like an open source component to our work. And so I've reached out to the community and said, hey, if you're looking to develop on the platform, we solved this problems for ourselves, but you're welcome to use our code, right? Like you have a one-click spin up of this test environment, and feel free to use it. And if you have some improvements or some feedback, we'd love to hear it. No one asked me to do that. There's not a single OKR that's like sitting there and being like, improve developer experience by 15% or something, right? I just know that I categorically wanted to solve this problem. I've solved this in the past, and I knew that we could have good outcomes from this. There's some caveats though, and I will say like part 2 of operating as a staff engineer, I think we'll tie this back into the book. There's some things that you need to be careful about, and these are really alluring, especially when you're stressed. They talk about avoiding snacking. I love this terminology, which is, this is low impact work that feels productive. So when I'm fixing spinning up the environment, I have to ask myself, am I just coping right now? Like, am I
Right.
doing this because I know how CI/CD pipelines work and I really like local dev environments, or is this really actually improving? Is this a high impact thing that can improve the lives of our team? And the other one was stop preening. Preening is another interesting one. Preening is he defines it as like low impact work with high visibility.
Yes.
So this is kind of being like, hey, look how effective I am, you know, and you're like, you're doing something that doesn't really matter, but like maybe it gets in front of the CEO or it gets in front of other people. And it's like busyness theater, if we're going to put it in the Cal Newport thing. And again, quite alluring. But a way to think about preening in my mind is if I look at all the preening I've done over the last 6 months and I haven't moved the needle on a single thing in the organization, that's preening, right? I've done, you've done a lot of stuff, quote unquote, but could you have delegated that? Could I have given that to a junior dev and used this as a sponsorship or mentoring opportunity? Which is, the answer is yes. You should absolutely. A lot of those preening tasks should be a mentorship thing of being like, hey, I've done this thing in the past. I think you'd be good. I think you'd learn about Git, or you'd learn about CI/CD, or you'd learn about how this weird memory management thing in our code base works. Like, and you know that's going to take them 3 or 4 times as long as you to do the problem because they don't understand the context. But moving forward, you now go, okay, I've trained this junior dev on how to look at our code base, and I can give them this like category of tests. Now you're being a staff engineer. So,
well, this leads us to our hot takes, right? I guess one of my hot takes for this book is, I think a little bit of preening can be good. Like I think you can't do exclusively preening, but for example, like the project I've been leading at Leland is Leland Plus, which is Leland Plus is Leland's content library. And so, for example, like Leland's bread and butter right now is the one-on-one coaching business, but there are lots of people who don't have the money for that. And so at Leland Plus, it's like a static content library, and it can be really useful because the content is more vetted and more niche for what people are wanting. So, for example, you can say like, this is a letter that a coach or this is an essay that got a candidate into the Harvard MBA program, and this coach vouches for this letter, right? Or there's all sorts of like little things like that. So Leland had previously been hosting that on like an off, like the shelf product, and had seen that there was enough business value in it to onboard it and kind of build it in-house. And that way we can kind of customize it. So that was my project. I led the development of Leland Plus. And we launched it just like a week ago. And it's been good. With all of that, there were things throughout the process that I noticed as like little pain points that like the ops team was talking about, and the ops being like the non-technical folks who are in charge of like actually administering all of this to like our clients. We're like, for example, one of the things, like we have a content upload team. They were in charge of taking the content from this third-party product and uploading it to our system. We built the content upload process. We didn't build a way to delete content entries. It didn't make sense. Like we were just uploading. But the only job was to upload. But we got to the point where we did need to start deleting things. And so they said, like, can we just provide you a list of things we need deleted, and you can run a script every week or something like that. And I thought for a second, I'm like, give me 30 minutes. If I can't build a real deal delete feature for you and like the ops tool in 30 minutes, then we can talk about it. But let me try. And I did it. It took 30 minutes. I got it all working. I said, there you go. There's your delete tool, right? I can see an argument from like the staff engineers, like this book's perspective, that like, no, that was a simple task. What you should have done was created a ticket and then assigned it out to a junior engineer and then mentored them through the process. Maybe I can see the argument for that. I also think there's an argument for showing yourself to be the kind of person who can get, decent impact, decent visibility work done quickly, and is unlocking your business partners to deliver more value more quickly. So I think you shouldn't have a zero tolerance policy for preening.
You're right, and I do think you should play it by. I think that was actually an example though of high impact, high
You
visibility
think so?
work.
Maybe, is that the
And
difference here?
well, and the reason I say it's high impact was that you solved a real pain point for a part of the business. To me, a low impact thing would be like you're just not quite happy about the font library that we're
Yeah, I could
using.
see that. Oh,
You know what
here's
I'm
a great
saying?
example. We, for some reason, just the way our auth provider was, we couldn't have the password field show up when you signed up on for an account. It was like you had to enter your email, and then it took you to like the Auth0 page, and then that's when you entered your full thing. Our CEO hated that. He really wanted the password to show up on the page. We wound up getting that by switching from Auth0 to Supabase, but maybe preening is a little more like that. Like if I had said, like, I know the CEO hates that the password field isn't showing up. I'm going to move mountains to make the password field show up. And ta-da, look, that's high visibility. It's on our front page. The CEO likes it. But did you really deliver any value? It's not a
Right.
huge deal to have the user
And I think in that case
enter the
too,
password.
that's a perfect example of you really should be delegating that out. Like you
Right,
might write the doc that says, you know, a description of the behavior and why it's important and these other things, and let somebody else sort it out. And you know, maybe you're the primary person doing the code review or something. I think being, especially in a startup, being able to be scrappy, right? This is the David versus Goliath thing, right? This is the only time in this you're in the most agile phase of your company's life right now.
Right.
This is the benefit of being a startup is that you can move faster than the big bureaucrats. And so, yeah, and that, it's also leading by example. You know, if anything, you take a lunch and learn out of this and say, you know what, I time bound this. I didn't want to invest half of a week or blow my sprint out of the water. I said, if I can do this in 30 minutes, if I can do these things, I set these boundaries for myself. And then you're showing leadership because you're saying, hey, if you can do this, it has this high impact, relatively low effort piece, and you've put a boundary on it. This is the engineering culture we want here. Well, that's cool. That's like, oh, this is the Leland way, right? Or whatever, right? You can give it some cool name. I think that, you know, we're helping each other. This has sounded really hard to somebody else, but to me, it was actually pretty easy. That's cool. That's like a pay it forward culture thing. So another one I've had to do and be careful about because, you know, I'm turning 42 this year. And so it's very easy to have what they call like the frozen caveman problem. I think this book calls it chasing ghosts, which is avoid applying solutions from previous companies without understanding the current context. And so another term for this is cargo culting. So this whole idea is this thing worked in the past. And if I just do it again, magically everything's going to work again. And you really should be skeptical of yourself for this. Especially someone like me who's been doing this for a while. And I go, oh, back at that fintech company, we did awesome things with dependency injection. And so if we just add dependency injection, all of our problems will be fixed, right? That would be chasing a ghost. I'm not really deciding whether this is the real most important thing strategically that organization needs to fix to solve some categorical problem. I'm really just saying like, oh, well, we solved a categorical problem with this in the past. And so therefore I'm going to champion this, right? And it was awesome. This guy looked so cool. I want to look cool like this guy did, right? Don't do that, right? That is a quick way to undermine your credibility. And what'll happen is people go, ugh, dude's old school, like doesn't understand what we're doing, obsessed with these like 5 things, you know? Yeah, so I appreciated this book framing because even if you're not technically a staff engineer, it's just a good piece of advice. Like past performance does not indicate future performance, right?
My other hot take from this book, and we've kind of alluded to it throughout this, is it, and you talk about this too, a very Silicon heavy book, or Silicon Valley heavy book. Don't chase big tech for big tech's sake. I think there's a lot of people who think this is when you arrive. This is when you know, this is what makes a real engineer, right? And I always say, like, I don't regret any of the big tech decisions I've made. Like, they pay very well. They've set my family and I up very well financially, and they've given me a lot of credibility in pursuing other opportunities. But actually, I had kind of a funny thought because like we took a pay cut moving from big tech to a startup, not like a terrible, awful pay. It was like a 30% pay cut. But the thing is that we live well beneath our means. And so not only do we still have discretionary income, but that 30% represented kind of purely discretionary income, right? the result of that has been that I'm much happier in my day to day. Like I enjoy the work I do a lot
Yep.
more. But it's funny because I was traveling this week. Actually, where I was at, I went to Orlando to go to Universal's new theme park, Epic Universe. But previously, when I've done kind of theme park trips, like on big tech money, we've honestly just had as a family so much money sloshing around that like we could just buy whatever we wanted, like on these trips. Because like once you've actually paid for the trip and are in the park, the difference between like splurging and not splurging is kind of like, okay, I'm either going to spend $300 over the course of this trip on food and souvenirs, or if I just went nuts and just bought as much food and as many souvenirs as I wanted, I'd spend $1,000, right? And there's just so much money sloshing around that like that didn't even matter. Like, what are you talking about? $700? That's nothing. We're not at that point anymore. We still have plenty of money to pay for these trips and to buy some souvenirs and to eat well, but I do think a little bit more when I'm making these discretionary purposes, right? And so I do miss that about big tech. It's just the money. But it's probably better to structure your life in a way where the thing you do 40 hours a week, day to day, brings you happiness. And then the trip you make once or twice a year, you feel a little more constrained than to kind of hate what you do 40 hours a week. But then when you go on the trip once or twice a year, you feel like you have a lot of money to spend. So
Yep.
I think a lot of it just comes down to like, you might read a book like this, you might think, oh, I have to get to the real engineering. I got to get to the Silicon Valley style companies where I'll finally be happy. It's not necessarily the case. You just have to know yourself and figure out what it is you're looking at for out of a career. And that will also change from time to time, right? Like I think it was really good for us to make big tech money for a while. It set us up on solid footing. But then once we got that solid footing, I wasn't really interested in continuing that. That to me, getting the solid footing gave me the freedom to say, what do I really want out of my career right now?
Yep.
So yeah, just figure out what you're looking for. And that might not be big tech, that might not be a staff engineer role. Just got to know yourself. What about you, Nathan? You got some hot takes?
Yeah, well, I'm from the street rat end of this. So the big tech companies were interested in me. What's funny is that if I wanted to go down that path now, I'm much more appealing.
I think so, yeah.
But I don't want to.
The host of Book Overflow.
Yeah,
You're
look at
banging
that.
down our doors to
I
get us to
know.
work.
Look at that. Hundreds to thousands of views on every episode. And but
hundreds of thousands? No, hundreds
I
to
wish
thousands.
hundreds to thousands, yeah. Hopefully that'll be like a really funny thing in the future.
Yeah.
No, to me, this is something that's been important to me for a long time. That fulfillment part, I think I'm glad that you found that observation. It's something that I've tried to optimize for, partially because I had to create my own path early on.
Right.
And we did this recently, right? We just moved to Costa Rica, back to Costa Rica. We used to live here. And my wife, her remote job was not okay with her coming down here. So she stepped away. And so it was like, pretty substantial adjustment to our income, probably, 35-40% reduction in our income. But the unit economics here are way different. So like things are much cheaper.
Right.
Take that back. Services are much cheaper. Things are more expensive. So you kind of have to find this sort of like minimalist way, but the environment's so nice, down here that it's very fulfilling to be around the jungle and the beach and the other things that we have. That from a lifestyle design standpoint, yes, the money's less, but we're also in like a weird spot where we're in the midst of doing some geo arbitrage where like we sold our house in the US. Looks like we're gonna be able to pay cash for a house down here. We haven't quite closed yet, but that's the case. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh man, my monthly budget is completely different. It's like unrecognizable when you're in a absolutely zero debt plus no rent standpoint, and we're living in a place we want to be in, not one that we're like, ooh, maybe one day we'll live in a cool spot. And so, yeah, this gets all the way back to like, there's an old book, super old at this point, but it had a big impact on me in the early 2000s called The 4-Hour Work Week, which was never about a 4-hour work week. It was really about designing a life that you want. And I would highly encourage anyone who's a listener of our podcast to optimize for your life over the money. I think that the money will follow if you really listen to yourself and you really maximize how valuable you are. Obviously, there are certain paths. Like my sister's a park ranger. It's a good example. She's picked a life that's not going to make a ton of money, right?
Right.
But she also lives within her means and has probably one of the most fulfilling lives if that's what you want to do, because breaking into that industry has a very high satisfaction score, even with all the crazy stuff going on with rethinking about how the federal agencies are. But this is important. And again, I'll put this staff engineering book in that category. This is a path you could go on. If you read this book and you go, I feel energized. Like, this is exactly the trajectory. If I could read the stories at the end of the book and you see yourself in that person's shoes and you say, I would love that. I would love if I got to go do blah, blah, blah. Then this is a good litmus for you're on the right path in life. If you look at this and go, that sounds horrible. Like, I don't want to do that. Use that too. Listen to your heart.
Pay attention to those impulses. There's a certain amount of eating your vegetables, which is good for you. My master's degree, for example, that was pure eating my vegetables. I didn't necessarily want to be doing a lot of that, but I'm glad I did it. But I think when it comes to a career, there's only so much eating your vegetables you can do before you just kind of get sick of it all. Any other hot takes, Nathan?
Yeah, just back to that hierarchy problem. I definitely think, and I've seen this in the past, we had a decent number of staff engineers at one of the startups I was in. Some of them were squarely staff engineers. They really were solving these sort of like ambiguity, cross-functional team stuff. Some folks, we obviously hired them from bigger tech and had struggled in navigating the ambiguity of being in a Series C company. And it was interesting to see the Peter principle in play. Again, the Peter principle being people in a hierarchy tend to rise to the level of respective incompetence.
Right.
This is something we should always ask ourselves is, did I get put into this position? Am I getting energy from it? Or did I get put in this position and I feel like I'm doing the worst job I've ever done? And like, why am I even here? That's a hard thing to analyze yourself. And it gets back into like if you ever heard about the Steve Jobs, like bozo explosion and a bunch of these other things, it's typically what happens is like well-intended individuals get promoted into a level of incompetence, and that they actually probably were pretty great at maybe one or two levels below, but now they're terrible because they're a victim of their own success. I think that this book doesn't address this. We've all
seen it.
I wish that this book had a section of was when to know that this is a bad fit.
Right.
Or,
right.
Oops, I'm a staff engineer and I shouldn't be one, right? Like that'd be really nice.
The book kind of assumes that you want to be a staff engineer. There's a little bit of like, make sure you want, you want this, but like if you're reading this book, it's all about what being a staff engineer is about. So, but I guess, maybe the reading this book would help you understand if this is the next step you want to take in your career.
Right.
I mean, Nathan, so what are we going to do differently? We've read the book. What are we going to do differently?
Okay. So, the thing that spoke to me, there's this idea of creating space for others. So I am a tech lead on the team. You hear me, I talk a lot on this podcast. So I will fill the room with my talking if I'm not careful, right? I will take things on my shoulders. I like, I'm like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, happy-go-lucky puppy in the room. But I need to make room for optimizing for mentorship and guidance. I've already started doing this. Like our team is starting to get cohesion. We've only been a team since March, right? So not that old of a team. We're really getting into this high trust scenario. And now I'm putting more company visible initiatives on the shoulders of the team. I liked that this book, they frame this as creating space for others, right? So it's like, I want everyone on my team to reach the maximum trajectory of where their career can go, right? I need to think about how do I make space for them to take risks and to show that they can step up to something that maybe is beyond what they were hired for. And so I like some of the tooling and the framework. I know it's a little more bureaucratic, and maybe I'm saying this as a barbarian, where I'm like, oh, I need to actually like let some bureaucracy fit in here. But creating space for others. That's what I'm working on.
No, that makes sense. As far as me, I think I want to continue focusing on high leverage work without becoming too removed from the business justifications. I think that you can fall into a trap where you're thinking, well, I'm rethinking our whole test suite, I'm implementing these pipelines, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's high leverage in a way, but is it the most critical problem we could be solving right now? I've been trying to take this tack of like, identifying, okay, what are the business challenges we're seeing, and then how are we solving that in like you were talking about, Nathan, in a way with that engineer you worked with, where like you solve it, it's done, we don't have to worry about it anymore. So yeah, I want to kind of continue to think about things that way. And then who would we recommend the book to?
This one's probably the clearest audience.
Right.
The audience is in the title. So ICs who are senior level and you're considering a staff plus track. I would read a book on going down the management path, and I would read this book. And
Right.
you should decide which one of these. If you read both of those books and you're like, ugh, you need to go join a startup.
Yeah. I would agree 100%. Yeah. No changes here. Well, that wraps us up for this week with Will Larson's Staff Engineer. The next time you see me, BYU football season will have started, and my mental well-being is purely in the hands of our newly named 18-year-old quarterback. So that's how I'm going to operate.
My ignorance will be bliss, so I'll be completely unaffected by any of this.
Where were you at again? Were you at LSU?
I went to LSU. It's a complete.
It's a great school.
People get so disappointed that I know nothing about. Nick Saban was the coach when I was there, which is like a legendary time period.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's before he became like a professional coach for a little bit, and then went to our arch nemesis, Alabama. So
yep, where he is legendary. That's so funny that you were at LSU and Nick Saban was the head coach and you don't know anything about football.
I went to one game and it started raining and I was like, this is terrible. And I left. And
no, I'm a fanatic. We got our season tickets. We're going to be there every home game this year. It's going to be great.
Amazing. Well, have fun.
It's going to be great. Yeah. Anyway.
We're little side note for our personal life. My daughter is a huge fan of the band System of a Down, and so we're going to New York.
As all 9-year-olds are.
As all 9-year-olds are, yeah, completely age appropriate music, and we are going to New York to see them as an early birthday present. So that's why again the scheduling's a little different. So yeah, we're flying to New York tomorrow. So
is she watching K-pop Demon Hunters at all?
She did watch it. She's been like apologizing. She's been like, she's like, it's really stupid, but some of the music's kind of good, but I mean, it's not, but it is. Like, she's very conflicted.
My son wants me to watch it with him, and I said, I'm like, I don't like K-pop. I don't love demons.
It's stupid.
I'm ambivalent on the hunting.
Yeah, so, it's really stupid. I like watched part of it, and I was like, I'm not watching this. So
we watched Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them last night. We're big Harry Potter fans. And I was just at the Universal with the Harry Potter stuff, and we're reading through the Harry Potter books, but they love the movies, but we're at a bottleneck where we can't watch the 6th movie until we finish the 6th book. And so he was astounded. He's like, there's a movie that doesn't have, like, we can watch it right now because we haven't read the book. The movie's not great, but he had a lot of fun. Anyhow, that's what you get if you stick around to the end of the episode. You get to hear us talk about our kids and K-pop Demon Hunters and movies and System of a Down. But you can also find us contact at bookoverflow.io, on Twitter at bookoverflowpod. I'm on Twitter at Carter Morgan, and Nathan's newsletter Functionally Imperative at functionallyimperative.com. Thanks for sticking around, folks. Looking forward to next week. Do we know what we're reading next week? I think we've planned it, but I don't.
Yeah, it might be Finite and Infinite Games, but we might have adjusted the list, so we'll see. There are folks who are excited that we're going to read this book. It's a little more philosophical and pretty short, and several people have talked about how there's a huge influence on them. So maybe we'll do it. Maybe otherwise, I need to go look at our backlog and see if that's not accurate anymore. So
no, I think it is Finite and Infinite Games. I don't know if we'd explicitly said we're reading it, but it's the next thing on the list. So
we're doing it.
We're committing right now. It's Finite and Infinite Games. Look forward to it, folks. All right. We'll see you around. Thanks for listening.